morning, everybody. We've been mixing and matching all the show hosts this week. Great to have Ryan Grimm with me today.
Good to be back here again. This has been a fun week.
Yeah, so Monday, my kids were off school, so I stayed home with them. Of course, they've just been like off school all week now with the snow that we had. Soccer's not sick today, so Ryan has been doing overtime for us this week, which we appreciate.
Hope he's better next week. The flu this season has been insane. Like Jeremy had it, he was like,
oh, really?
He was laid out for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, it has been decimating my kids' schools for sure. The one, I can manage a flu. The one I cannot manage is the norovirus. That's the one I live in terror of.
Ooh.
Yeah, and that's been going through my daughter's school as well. So we're praying to avoid that
over
one.
this way.
Yeah, exactly. In any case, we got a lot to get to in the show today. It was actually very difficult to choose the stories because there was so much we wanted to cover. We've got a bunch of updates for you with regard to DOGE, the latest cuts, where they're hitting. Also, a little bit of Republican pushback on some of the specific spending cuts, including some comments from Jesse Waters, which was a bit of a surprise. They've also been caught in more lies and screw-ups with regard to what they claim they have cut. So we'll take a look at all of that and do a little debunking there. We have huge developments with regard to Ukraine. So Zelensky rejected Trump's offer to basically give up half his country, all his rare earth minerals and the ports and the whatever. And now Trump is out calling him a dictator and blaming him directly for the war. So huge sort of 180 there in terms of the U.S. stance and even in terms of Trump's rhetoric and Trump's stance. So we'll break that down for you. We also have a new significant development in terms of the courts, Trump refusing to abide by one particular court order. That is a significant escalation in, what I consider to be a constitutional crisis. He is also declaring himself king, literally, and blocking the New York City congestion pricing. So that's an interesting story just in terms of the local politics and then also in terms of Trump inserting himself in that city's politics and policy specifically. We've got a guest on who's been directly impacted by the spending freeze. He's going to talk about how that has been, impactful to his company and the people that he's trying to help and serve. And I am also taking a look at how Trump and Elon are basically doing like a rug pull on the whole country. So putting a few pieces together here, something I've been thinking about for a while.
Yeah, the turn with Zelensky is extraordinary because everybody saw where this was going, but I don't think anybody saw that it was going to go this dark, this fast.
Yeah,
like it's bleak.
Yeah,
if you're Ukraine, if you're Zelensky,
yeah,
you went from being feted across the United States and the West to being called a dictator.
Right, and this is when your adversary here is Vladimir Putin, who is much more accurately characterized as a dictator. So there's obviously...
Trump should be a little more cautious about throwing that word around on the same day that he's putting up a picture of himself with a crown.
Right, literally and declaring himself king.
He hates when people call him that. Anyway.
Yeah, truly, actually, Elon is the true dictator here, so maybe he's just trying to reclaim some of his power. Right.
Hey, if ruling without an election means you're a dictator, according to Elon, what is Elon? Yeah.
I think we know the answer to that. Yeah. And that is a good transition into the first block. So as I mentioned before, we have had a little bit of Republican pushback. And part of this is coming from, all these different Republican senators and congressmen. They're realizing this and that project in my district are directly affected. Or, as in the case with the USAID funding freeze, the farmers in my state are going to be completely screwed by this. But one thing that many of these people didn't seem to realize is that there are a lot of veterans in the federal government. And also, actually, DEI programs also include, oftentimes, opportunities specifically for veterans. So one of the people who is apparently finding this out is Fox News host Jesse Waters, who took to those airwaves with a plea for a specific friend of his. Let's take a listen to that.
Let me tell you a story about Chris. Chris was a guy I met at a shooting event in New Jersey last year.
Was Chris in the interview? Or this is another guy? This is Chris.
Is it a male or female?
Let me finish.
Oh.
55 billion.
I love you. And so he was a 20-year veteran of the U.S. military. He was one of these guys in one of these elite units. Killed a lot of bad guys. Put his life on the line. And now he punched out after 20 years and working for the Pentagon. And he's only been there a few months, so he's probationary. And he just found out he's probably going to get laid off. He's going to get doged. And he texted me and he said, Jesse, this isn't good. I'm upset. This is really sad. And this guy's not a DEI consultant. This guy's not a climate consultant. this guy is a veteran. So when you're talking about doging people, veterans should get priority. Because if you're going to go out there and kill enemies and put your life on the line for this country, you shouldn't be in the same category as people that are doing DEI. Now, Harold and his ilk like to talk about the slash and burn corporate ethos. We just need to be a little bit less callous with the way, Harold, we talk about doging people. Okay, I want that to sink in.
You're arguing with yourself.
I am not guilty of that. I finally found one person I knew that got doged, and it hit me in the heart.
There is so much about that that is fascinating. First of all, I like the terminology getting doged.
Right.
Going to adopt that.
Yeah.
But in addition, so first he says that this individual who, I don't know his circumstances, isn't a DEI consultant. He may well have been part of a DEI hiring program, since they do oftentimes benefit veterans. But also what he's specifically advocating here for, Ryan, is a DEI program to make sure that veterans, because he finds them to be a sympathetic group that he believes is, worthy of humanity and keeping their jobs, that they should be enabled to stay there.
And for some reason over the years, veterans have not done a very good job of establishing the federal workers as related to the veterans program. But it is. Like over the decades, what the United States did is used the federal government as a way to give a leg up to people who were finishing their service.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a couple of veterans last night because I was tweeting about this Jesse Waters thing, and they were reaching out. And one of the points they made is that when you leave the service, whether you did your 4 years or 20, it can be difficult to get private sector work immediately, because they will say you need 3 to 5 years of industry experience. And like a good friend of mine, for instance, did telecommunications work for the Army, but that's for the Army. So he had all the skills,
right?
But it was difficult to immediately get into the private sector. Like eventually he got some entry-level stuff, and then because he had so many skills, he moved up quickly. But some companies recognize that experience, others don't. The federal government does. So the federal government is like, we know that you're well-trained and you're good. Like you come on in. And a couple people said that you also have to consider that in the first couple years while you're in the probationary period, a lot of these people are still in the Guard or Reserve. And so if you're going after probationary people who, the first couple years, like a lot of the people who are getting fired, not just the Pentagon, but all across the federal government, are active duty military, like because they're overlapping with that.
Interesting.
So, we went in 20 years of our covering politics from support our troops to actively firing our troops.
In disproportionate numbers.
In disproportionate numbers.
Wow, that is incredible, and it also just speaks to what we're being sold is this is all about merit and it's all about efficiency, et cetera. When you're just blanket firing everyone who happens to fall in a particular category, or with the deferred resignation program, you're most likely to be culling actually the highest level, most difficult to replace people who have the largest number of opportunities in the private sector. And let me tell you, once they're out in the private sector making those salaries, they're very unlikely to come back. It's actually the polar opposite of, selecting for merit and making sure that it's the best and the brightest serving in government. So you've got a little bit of an inkling of awareness dawning on Jesse Waters and some others with regard to the way that the federal government has benefit veterans. You also have, as I mentioned before, some Republicans who are starting to feel some pain in terms of priorities for their constituents in their districts and their states. Susan Collins has come out with a statement now. We can put this up on the screen. This is from Politico. There were actually a number of outlets that were out with kind of similar stories about different Republican rumblings about this or that program. She says you'll see lawsuits. She actually questioned, she said, I think it's pretty clear that this violates Article 1 of the Constitution. She's significant not only because she's one of the few remaining Republicans in a pretty blue state of Maine, but she also is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. What did you make of her comments, Ryan? And do you think that it matters? Because typically, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, they'll do like a little bit of, they need to slow down a little and I'm a little uncomfortable or whatever. But when push comes to shove, they just basically go along with everything anyway.
It matters because of her position. Like the Appropriations Committee considers itself to be, in particular the Senate Appropriations Committee, considers itself to be the wellspring of everything that the United States government does.
Yeah.
Like they call the subcommittee chairs cardinals. Because they want it to be clear that power is being projected from the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee. And for her to get to that position, her entire career, she's wanted to get on that spot because with the flick of a wrist, she's sending billions of dollars here and there. And all of a sudden, she's being told, actually, no, we're not.
Yeah. Actually, you don't matter anymore.
You're making suggestions, and it's the administration that is going to pick and choose which ones we'll actually execute on. And that is an existential threat. The reason she matters is because the government, unless Trump just completely ignores everything, will shut down on March 14th without a spending package being passed through Congress. A spending package really needs Susan Collins as the Senate Appropriations Chair. Now, if Republicans, because how do you get 60 Democrats if Susan Collins is, vociferously opposed to it? Like I don't see how you get there. So then the government shuts down. So you need her. Meanwhile, you've got, as we're going to talk about, Trump supporting the House side
version
over the Senate side, which includes all these Medicaid cuts. So I do think the fact that she's Susan Collins doesn't matter. I'm sure he hates Susan Collins. He doesn't. Does he even care if she wins re-election in 2026? I don't know. They can afford to lose her.
Right.
But the fact that she sits in this chokehold position at the top of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I think, matters, at least in this moment.
Is she up in 2026? I didn't realize that.
I think she is, right? Because she...
I think you're right, because I think she was up in 2018. Yeah. She was part of that. There was an expectation she would, is that right?
Well, she was up in 2020.
She was up in, so it would be, yeah, that's right. Okay.
And she'll probably face Jared,
not working yet.
probably face Jared Golden, who's extremely popular, House member there, who was won in a Trump district like 3 straight times.
And in an environment that's just, increasingly partisan.
Yeah.
Where I think there was previously more Democratic-based willingness to, I like this particular senator, whereas Republicans have made that like sort of more hard partisan switch years ago. So I do think she could be in trouble, and I think you're right, Trump probably doesn't really care all that much.
And it probably works for her to stand up to Trump in Maine.
True. Yeah. So that's interesting. Also interesting, put the Washington Post version of the story up on the screen. They covered some of the things we've already talked about. Katie Britt down in Alabama being like, I don't know about this NIH funding. Some of the senators who come from farming states, I don't know about this USAID freeze. We need to get this, agricultural products
moving.
And
the money for conservation and all these contracts and you've probably seen these going around on TikTok, these like farmers.
Yeah, that's right.
Who are like, wait a minute. Like I spent all this money on my farm because I had a contract with the federal government.
That's right.
To do this particular thing.
Yeah, now I'm out of pocket 80 grand that I thought was going to be half reimbursed by the federal government, and I'm literally screwed. Like my farm is gone if this doesn't ultimately come through. So they're hearing from those constituents. But actually, what I found most interesting in this article was from one of the people who is supporting DOGE and Trump and Elon fully, which is Senator Tommy Tuberville, who suggested that the new normal may be just Republican senators and congresspeople having to go and plead their case to Trump and to Elon. And, I'm sure that's the way that they would like it to be, where they can sort of, dispense the favor of the king to people who are in their good graces. And that helps to continue to, enforce compliance with their will and make sure everybody's on board. So he said, and I quote, if we have to lobby for, hey, wait a minute, what about that bridge in Birmingham, or there's a bridge in Mobile or whatever, I think that could be very possible. So he's laying out that, he's fine with that direction because he has favored status with the king. He wants to keep that favored status with our, CEO and chair of the board or whatever you want to call this duo at this point. And that may just be the new reality. And I think there's probably something to that because, Trump has truly claimed the power of the purse for himself. We're going to cover some of his additional moves, issuing this executive order too, saying only I and Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, get to have a say on what is legal. He, of course, said this thing about there is no breaking the law if you're saving the country. He literally declared himself a king in the context of this New York City congestion plan. And so Tommy Tuberville laying it out like, yeah, that's just how things are now. You have to go and beg your case to the people with power if you want to get these projects in your district.
Yeah. And, there's that famous allegorical story of, I guess, the hippie who's like, walking through the West and he comes to a fence and he's like, fences suck, man. I hate this fence. Why is this fence here? And just takes the fence apart. And then whatever calamity ensues. Like pick your calamity. The hogs run out and they destroy the forest by chewing everything up or whatever it is. Without any stepping back and saying, why is this fence here?
Right.
And who built this fence and why? And usually that is an allegory that's told by the right about reckless left-wingers who just barrel in and they just
change everything.
Change everything. And the conservatives are the ones that understand fence is there for a reason. What Trump and Tuberville here are kind of proposing is not brand new on the scene. Like if you would have told LBJ or Richard Nixon that, hey, that the president is going to dole out projects and that's how he's going to accrue power over these members of Congress, they'd be like, yeah, that is how I roll. It was after Nixon so thoroughly abused, and Johnson abused it too, that Congress reasserted itself and passed the Impoundment Control Act and these other laws that said, no, that's not constitutional. We do this, not you, because you get too much power if you do that. And so now they're trying to roll that back. So it's always like, well, there's a reason there's a fence here. Maybe you don't like the fence, but be careful what you wish for.
There's also the context of, in those prior eras, in the LBJ and FDR era, there was a lot more cross-party collaboration because the parties had not ideologically sorted themselves in the way that they have now.
Regional politics, too.
And there were a lot more regional politics. And so now you have this set of very clear blue states, very clear red states, and a few states that are on the margin that are like the only ones that matter in terms of presidential politics. And the only ones where you could see, shift back and forth between who represents them, which party represents them in the Senate. So, it's a recipe for, okay, when Republicans are in power, then red states get some of their projects and blue states get actively screwed. And guess what? When Democrats are in power, if that is such a thing that's ever allowed or possible again in the future, they're going to reciprocate. They're going to do the exact same thing. Like once you have started in this direction, you think the next president is going to be like, I'm going to hand power back to Congress. Yeah. Very unlikely. Very unlikely. So let's get into some of the things, I'll do a sort of speed run through some of the most recent cuts, which will help to explain why some of these Republicans are getting a little leery, even if they're not saying a whole lot publicly. And nor do I expect them really to say a whole lot publicly, because ultimately the bottom line is they all have come to understand they have to pay fealty to Trump and to his movement and Elon at this point, or else they will get screwed, and he is not afraid to do it, or they'll have primary challenges against them, et cetera. So A3, we've got the USDA accidentally firing officials who were working on bird flu and now trying to rehire them, but apparently having trouble with that because they are struggling to find them. They didn't bother to get their new contact information. So this speaks to the just sort of blanket, like, oh, we're just going to blanket fire this group of people. Turns out, in this instance, and also in the instance of some of the people who were like guarding some of our nuclear sites, some of these individuals are really important, and you don't want to fire them, especially when bird flu is looming out there as a possible next pandemic. In addition, we can put the next one up on the screen. So they have decimated this education department arm that is really devoted to studying the efficacy of public schools across the country. So seeing which schools are doing well, which schools are performing poorly. That seems like something you would kind of want to know. Let's put the next one up on the screen. Also, in their zeal to cut at the Department of Education in particular, they've let go of 10% of federal student aid staff. So they say, and Prem Thakur says this comes after young DOGE staffers obtained administrative access at the Department of Education. So that was one of the first casualties there. Put the next one up on the screen. And Trump has also cut numerous top researchers at NIH's Center for Combating Alzheimer's. Huge setback potentially in the fight against various forms of dementia. Anyone, of course, who's had a relative who has gone through this, parent, loved one, et cetera, knows how absolutely devastating it was. And the irony here, too, is that this was a cause, Greg Sargent points out, once championed by Republicans. In fact, he specifically points out that the NIH's Center for Alzheimer's and Related Dementias, or CARD, its full name is the Roy Blunt Center for Alzheimer's and Related Dementias, in honor of former Republican Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, who was very influential. What did you make of these cuts in particular, Ryan? What stood out to you here?
The counter argument to Alzheimer's in particular, and more broadly to a lot of these NIH cuts, is that, they're doing a really bad job. We still have Alzheimer's. That's the argument that you hear. And there's a more sophisticated argument that says that the particular approach that the researchers who were getting all of the NIH funding to Alzheimer's has been a dead end and has set us back by 10 or 15 years. And so you actually need to break up this kind of intellectual cabal that has gotten in the way of progress. My counter argument would be, that's not what they're doing here, though. First of all, there was a new director coming in who was not associated. Obviously everybody is somewhat associated with that, but that was not her main line of interest. This dead end research, and they fired her. And they're likely to continue doing these reductions in force going forward. So it's not as if they came in and they said, we have evaluated the Alzheimer's unit.
Right.
We feel like you haven't made progress. We feel like it's because you focus too much over here. And so the people that were doing that, there's going to be accountability. You guys are gone. We're going to invest broadly across the board in lots of different approaches. And we're going to see, this is a scientific approach. We're going to go in with hypotheses and we're going to see which one works. We're going to stop putting our thumb on the scale one way or the other, because obviously you have a hypothesis and you pursue that. And at some point, if the hypothesis is turning out not to be true, you have alternative ones.
Yeah.
I don't have alternative ones. They're not doing that. It's not as if these people that were fired they're going to backfill. They're going to retrench, and then they're going to fire more people, and then they're going to fire more people, and then they're going to cut more funding, calling it, funding to universities and other projects. They're going to cut that further back. So, if you really were doing a MAHA approach, saying this didn't work, let's look around. We're not a healthy country. This is what we're going to do. Okay, that's one thing, but the indication is that they're just cutting and it's going to stay cut.
Yes, that's exactly right. And this is actually the topic of my monologue, is that a lot of the ethos of Trump 2.0 is basically like, things are bad, so we're going to make them worse. And,
right, I'm like, yeah, they are bad.
Yeah, they are bad. But, because what happens when you cut public research funding is that then you become more reliant on private industry funding. That's the polar opposite of the direction that you want to go in. And, I thought your story about the developments with regard to breast cancer that are impacting your family directly right now was really important and poignant, because one of the things that I really object to as well is scientific research is not necessarily efficient, right? Because number one, if you want to find cures for diseases that are potentially rare, those things aren't going to be profitable. And so there isn't going to be private research, not to mention that every single new drug molecule that's been invented in the past, I don't know how many years, has come out of public funding. So the drug companies are not really doing this type of life-saving research. Most of what they do is researching some way that they can dupe our patent system and extend their patent on Viagra or whatever their top-selling drug is. So, there's that. And then there's also the case that, as you're pointing out, Ryan, some of scientific research is kind of serendipity, and that's what you spoke to, is like, oh, these people happen to be together at a conference, which would be classified as quote unquote overhead. And because you had this serendipity mixing of these minds from different disciplines and different corners of the scientific research community, there was a really incredible and important development that was made. In addition, sometimes you're going to pursue something like with Alzheimer's that doesn't turn out to be the thing. And so it's not quote unquote efficient. But if you didn't go down that path, you wouldn't know. And there was a possibility that it did work out and it did end up, saving lives and being incredibly impactful for people. So when you apply this capitalist business logic to something like public research in the benefit of the people, like, you're going to end up with far worse results and far fewer breakthroughs that are important for all of our lives.
Yeah, and the entire budget for NIH last year was $47 billion. The cost of treating people with Alzheimer's, as people can look that up, huge.
Yeah.
Like from Medicare and Medicaid,
Yeah.
and you personally, and like you watching this, like you personally, or your parents, or your cousins, or somebody might have to bankrupt yourself so that you can so that Medicaid will then cover either you or your parents getting the coverage that they need when Alzheimer's hits. And that's aside from the absolute terror that Alzheimer's is, plus the heartbreak it is for families who are going through it, to be in a room physically with their loved one, but spiritually they don't even know you're there. They don't recognize who you are. To save a couple bucks a week is short-sighted spiritually and morally, but also fiscally.
Yeah.
It costs more money to not try to prevent this. And also, like you said, commercially speaking, preventing Alzheimer's, if we can prevent it, is not the kind of thing that you can then market and sell, because you make more money treating it with like a blockbuster drug
than preventing it in the first place.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. What did you say the NIH budget is?
I think 47 with a B, 47 billion.
According to ChatGPT, as of 2024, the U.S. projected to spend approximately $360 billion on health and long-term care for individuals living with Alzheimer's. That's projected to be up to $1 trillion by 2050.
So the entire NIH budget, that includes the weaponized, militarized stuff that they're sneaking into Africa for labs and whatever.
Right.
Like that even includes that, is a fraction of what we spend treating Alzheimer's.
Yeah, there's this assumption, this is a longer convo, that capitalism leads to cost savings and efficiency.
That feels high, by the way. ChatGPT might be off on that.
Okay, well, you can take a look. It does hallucinate, so you never know. But when you look at our healthcare system, which we, of course, put profit at the center of our healthcare system, and that directly leads to us paying the highest costs and having the worst outcomes in the developed world. And so if you actually want to improve people's health, what you do is you shift that dynamic away from centering profit and towards actually valuing people's health. And cutting back on public research spending dollars is, again, the polar opposite of the direction that you ultimately want to go on. Did you find any?
No.
All right. Well, we'll take a look and verify those numbers and post a note in the segment. But yeah, blame AI blame Sam Altman if the numbers aren't ultimately correct.
It's expensive.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and it's worth researching to see how we could prevent Alzheimer's ultimately in the long term.
Yeah, $231 billion this is Alzheimer's impact movement.
Wow. So.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. All right, let's go ahead and get to some of the spin and the latest spin and lies coming out of DOGE. So the whole time Elon has been like, oh, we're going to be so transparent, which of course is the polar opposite of the way that they've operated. And specifically, they were claiming for weeks that they were going to post this list of all the incredible savings that they've been able to glean from, these wasteful federal government expenditures.
Right. This is not ChatGPT.
Numbers are correct. All right. Well,
in
there you go.
2050, Medicare spending on people with Alzheimer's will total a projected $453 billion with a B.
And that's just Medicare.
That's just Medicare.
That's not private spending. Yeah. Wow. Unbelievable.
$637 billion
So thanks for saving us all that money, DOGE. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, by firing like 8 people working in the Alzheimer's Center. 8 people. We could do we would be smart as a country to do a GoFundMe to rehire those 8 people. Just putting a couple chips onto the table in hopes that they have a breakthrough. It would be worth it to all of us to just do that GoFundMe. I'll put in $5 a week on that.
Absolutely. Such a great point.
I mean, Alzheimer's is, it's personally got to be frightening to everybody. Just if you personally or your loved one gets it, it's almost, I'd rather get hit by a bus.
Yeah. No, I have a very close friend who has been, watching this unfold.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most difficult things you can go through.
And you're going to save a couple bucks a week and fire these 8 researchers? Like, it's cruel and stupid.
Yeah, cruel and stupid. That is a good way to put it.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.